You can run to the edge of the world, Miss Keller, but edges have a way of crumbling. The man's voice slithered through the phone like something cold and patient. Not angry, not threatening. Worse than both. He spoke the way someone might discuss dinner plans while watching a mouse struggle in a trap. We found you in Portland. Boise was almost clever. Montana showed some creativity, I'll admit. A pause filled with the soft sound of papers shuffling. But Wyoming in December? That's not escape. That's surrender with extra steps. Naomi Keller pressed the burner phone against her ear so hard the plastic creaked. Her breath came in shallow gasps that crystallized in the mountain air. Tiny clouds of fear made visible. The board is getting impatient, Naomi. 7 months is a long time to chase someone who used to be one of us. They're starting to ask why we haven't simply ended this. Another pause. Longer. I keep telling them you'll come to your senses, that you'll remember what happens to people who forget where their loyalties belong. But my patience has limits, and winter in Wyoming can be so terribly fatal. She ended the call. Her fingers had gone numb, though whether from cold or terror, she couldn't tell anymore. The burner phone slipped from her grasp and disappeared into the snow at her feet. 7 months. 7 cities. 7 identities shed like dead skin. And still Victor Ashworth found her with the casual precision of a cat batting at a wounded bird. He never rushed, never raised his voice. He simply reminded her, call after call, that her life continued only because he permitted it. Naomi pressed her back against a frozen pine, feeling the bark bite through her jacket. The mountain road stretched empty in both directions, nothing but darkness and snow, and the distant howl of wind screaming through the peaks. Her red jacket blazed against the white landscape like a wound that refused to close. She should have abandoned the coat months ago. Too bright, too memorable, too easy to spot from above. But it was the last piece of her former life that hadn't been stripped away or poisoned. The last thing she owned that predated the discovery, the betrayal, the moment her own mother had looked at her with fear instead of love, and whispered, "We can't be involved." The scar on her neck throbbed in the frigid air. It always did when she thought about family. Before we continue, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from tonight. 2 miles up the mountain, Lucas Reed stood at the window of the weather monitoring station, watching snow swirl against the glass like static on a dead channel. The station was a concrete box perched on a ridge, built 40 years ago when someone in the government decided this particular patch of wilderness needed watching. Now it housed outdated equipment, emergency supplies, and one man who had chosen isolation the way others chose retirement communities. Lucas lifted his coffee cup and found it empty. He couldn't remember drinking it, couldn't remember making it, if he was honest. The days blurred together up here, each one identical to the last, marked only by weather readings and the slow rotation of seasons. Ghost lay near the door, positioned exactly where he always positioned himself, between Lucas and any potential entry point. 8 years of habit had carved that behavior into the old dog's bones, and neither of them saw reason to change it now. The Belgian Malinois was showing his age. Silver had crept across his muzzle like frost, and he moved slower on cold mornings, his joints protesting the Wyoming winters. But his eyes remained sharp, and his instincts stayed razor-keen. Some things time couldn't dull. Lucas turned from the window and noticed Ghost's ears rotating. Not alarmed, interested, tracking something beyond the walls that human senses couldn't detect. "What is it, old man?" Ghost rose to his feet, slow but deliberate. His nose pointed toward the door, and a low sound rumbled in his chest. Not a growl, something closer to a question. In 8 years of isolation, Ghost had never shown interest in anything beyond their immediate territory. He tolerated the occasional hiker who wandered too close, ignored the wildlife that moved through the forest, remained indifferent to everything that didn't directly concern his human. But now the dog was moving toward the door with purpose Lucas hadn't seen in years. Not frantic, determined, the way he used to move when tracking targets in environments where mistakes meant body bags. "Easy," Lucas set down his empty cup. "What's got you wound up?" Ghost looked back at him, just once. A glance that communicated something Lucas couldn't quite translate, though they had spent nearly a decade learning each other's language. Then the dog scratched at the door. Lucas grabbed his jacket from the hook. The military instincts he had tried to bury for 10 years stirred in his chest, checking his awareness, sharpening his focus. He pulled on boots, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and collected a flashlight from the emergency kit. No weapon. He had stopped carrying those years ago, had locked them in a case he never opened, unable to touch the tools that reminded him of everything he had failed to prevent. The cold hit him like a wall when he stepped outside. Negative temperatures and wind chill that turned exposed skin to ice within minutes. Ghost pushed past his legs and set off down the slope, moving with certainty through snow that reached his chest in places. Lucas followed. He didn't question where the dog was leading him. Ghost had earned that trust in places far more dangerous than a Wyoming mountainside. They walked for nearly half an hour, down the ridge, through a stand of pine trees bent crooked by decades of wind, across a frozen creek bed that groaned beneath their weight. Ghost never hesitated, never paused to reconsider. He moved like something was pulling him forward, some signal only he could receive. The road appeared through the trees, a 2-lane stretch of cracked asphalt that connected the mountain communities to the valley below, empty now except for snow and silence, and a figure huddled against a tree. Lucas stopped at the edge of the tree line. His eyes swept the scene with practiced efficiency, cataloging details before his conscious mind caught up. Female, alone, red jacket bright against the snow. Body language screaming fear and exhaustion in equal measure. Hands empty but twitching, ready to defend or flee. Ghost had already reached her. The dog stood 3 feet away, not approaching closer, simply waiting. His tail hung still, his posture alert, but not aggressive. Evaluating. The woman scrambled to her feet when she noticed them. Her legs shook. Whether from cold or terror, Lucas couldn't tell. She raised her hands in front of her chest, palms out, fingers spread. The gesture hit Lucas like a fist. Not surrender, expectation. The stance of someone who had been caught so many times that capture felt inevitable. "Please," her voice cracked on the word. "Whatever they're paying you, I don't have anything left. Just make it quick, please." Lucas removed his cap, slowly, deliberately, the way he would approach a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "I'm not here to hurt you." She laughed. The sound held no humor, only bitter recognition of a lie she had heard before. "Don't be afraid." He kept his voice low, letting the words fall between them like offerings. If I wanted to hurt you, you'd already know. Something in her expression fractured. The defensive mask slipped, and beneath it, Lucas saw exhaustion so profound it bordered on collapse. She stared at him, searching his face for the threat she expected to find. Ghost moved closer to her. 1 step, 2, then he sat, positioning himself within arm's reach of the trembling woman, and looked back at Lucas with an expression that needed no translation. This one. She's why we came. Naomi Keller had stopped believing in mercy 5 months ago, somewhere between Boise and Montana, when she realized that every kindness she encountered came with strings attached. The helpful truck driver who offered her a ride and then asked questions that proved he was fishing for information. The shelter volunteer who seemed so sympathetic right up until Naomi spotted her making a phone call with urgency that didn't match the conversation. The old woman at the bus station who pressed a $20 bill into her hand and then watched her board with eyes that tracked every detail of her appearance. Trust had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Suspicion kept her alive. But the dog sitting at her feet showed no signs of hidden agenda. Animals didn't lie. They didn't manipulate or deceive or wear masks that hid their true intentions. This silver-muzzled creature had approached her with something that looked almost like recognition, and now he waited beside her as if standing guard. His name's Ghost. The man's voice drifted through her spiraling thoughts. He doesn't warm up to strangers. Takes him weeks usually. Months, sometimes. I've seen him ignore people for entire seasons. Naomi looked down at the dog. Ghost met her gaze with calm steadiness, and something in her chest loosened against her will. What does it mean? The question escaped before she could stop it. When he comes to someone like this. The man was quiet for a moment. His gray eyes reflected the moonlight like worn steel. Means he sees something. Can't tell you what. But in 8 years, he's never been wrong about people. The wind picked up, driving snow between them like interference on a bad signal. Naomi shivered, her body finally registering the cold she had been ignoring for hours. There's an old ranger station half a mile east, the man continued. Abandoned, but the roof holds and there's a working fireplace. Storm's coming in hard tonight. Won't be fit for anything living out here in another hour. Every instinct Naomi had, developed over 7 months, screamed warnings. Isolated location, unknown male, no witnesses. The setup for every nightmare scenario she had been taught to avoid. But Ghost hadn't moved from his position at her side. The dog's presence felt like testimony, like a character reference from something older and wiser than human judgment. One night, the man said, shelter until morning. Then we figure out what comes next. What's your name? He considered the question, deciding how much truth to share with a stranger he had found freezing on a mountain road. Lucas? Lucas Reed. And you just happened to be out here? Middle of the night? Middle of a storm in the middle of nowhere? I work at the weather station 2 miles up. He gestured vaguely toward the ridge. Ghost and I were running a perimeter check when he caught something on the wind. Wouldn't settle until I followed him down here. So your dog led you to me? That's about the size of it. Naomi looked at Ghost again. The old dog's tail moved slightly. Not quite a wag. An acknowledgement. I can't go to the police. The words came out flat, practiced. She had said them so many times they had lost all meaning. They can't help me. No one can help me. Didn't offer the police. Then what do you want? Lucas shrugged. The gesture was somehow more honest than any words could have been. I want to get out of this wind before it takes my ears off. Beyond that, I haven't figured out yet. He turned and began walking toward the tree line. "You coming or not?" Ghost rose and pressed gently against Naomi's leg. A nudge. Encouragement from something that had no reason to lie. She followed. The walk to the ranger station took 20 minutes through deepening snow. Lucas moved with steady purpose, despite a slight limp that became more pronounced as the terrain grew rougher. He never looked back to check if she was following, but his pace remained manageable, adjusted to account for her exhaustion without acknowledging it directly. Ghost ranged between them, occasionally dropping back to walk at Naomi's side before surging forward to scout ahead. The old dog moved through the storm like something born to it, unbothered by wind that made Naomi's eyes water, and cold that numbed her fingers inside her gloves. She watched Lucas as they walked, cataloging details the way her training had taught her. Military bearing, the way he moved, the way he held himself, the constant subtle awareness of his surroundings. Not current service, she guessed. The beard and longer hair suggested someone who had left that world behind. But the body remembered what the mind tried to forget. The limp favored his right leg. An old injury, probably. Something that flared in cold weather, that he had learned to work around rather than fix. And there was something else. Something in the set of his shoulders and the distance in his eyes. A weight that had nothing to do with physical burden. She recognized it because she carried the same invisible load. The ranger station materialized from the darkness like a forgotten promise. Small, weathered, its windows boarded, and snow drifted against its foundation. But the structure looked solid, capable of keeping out what the night intended. Lucas produced a key and unlocked the door. "Forestry Service lets me use this place during storms. Easier than making the full trip back." Inside, the air was cold but still. No wind, no watching eyes, just the musty smell of a building that had stood empty through too many seasons. He moved through the space with familiar efficiency. Kerosene lamp lit and hung from a hook. Fireplace flue, checked and opened. Firewood pulled from a stack against the back wall. Within minutes, flames crackled in the hearth, pushing orange light across the rough wooden floor. Naomi stood near the door. Her eyes swept the room automatically. One entrance, two boarded windows that could be broken through if necessary. A back room she couldn't see into. She memorized the layout in seconds, the same way she had memorized every temporary shelter for 7 months. "That corner," Lucas said without looking up from the fire. "Clear view of the door and the window. Good sight lines, easy access to the back exit if you need it." She froze. "How did you know I was looking for that?" "Because I do the same thing every time I enter a room." He fed another log to the growing flames. Old habits. Their eyes met across the firelight. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that comes when broken people find each other in broken places. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Naomi crossed to the corner he had indicated and lowered herself to the floor. Her back pressed against the wall, her eyes fixed on the door. Ghost followed and settled about an arm's length away, close but not crowding, present without being threatening. For a long time, neither human spoke. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind began to howl as the promised storm descended. "You're not a hiker," Naomi said finally. "No. Not a ranger. No. Military." Lucas added another log to the fire. His movements were precise, practiced, the motions of someone who had built fires in hostile territory where light could mean death. "Navy. Long time ago." "How long?" "Long enough." The conversation died there, but the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood that some questions carried costs too high to pay. Ghost shifted, moving closer to Naomi until his side pressed against her leg. The weight was warm, solid, the first kind contact she had felt in 7 months. He really doesn't do this with strangers? Lucas turned from the fire. The orange light carved deep shadows across his face, making him look older, more tired, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for far too long. Last person Ghost accepted that fast was a young sergeant back in Afghanistan. Kid was struggling, thinking about doing something permanent. He paused. Ghost spent 3 days following him around, sleeping outside his tent, just being there. Kid told me later the dog was the only reason he made it home. What happened to him? The sergeant? He made it home, got help, built a life. Lucas's voice softened. That's what matters. Naomi's hand moved without conscious thought, settling on Ghost's head. His fur was coarser than she expected, weathered by years of hard conditions, but warm beneath her palm. You should rest, Lucas said. I'll take first watch. I don't sleep much anymore. Neither do I. He settled against the wall across from her, positioning himself with clear view of the door and window. But we can take turns not sleeping, keep each other company. Despite everything, Naomi felt something twitch at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. You do this often? Rescue strangers from the side of the road? Never. His gray eyes met hers, and something flickered in their depths. But I know what it looks like when someone's at the end of their rope. I've been there, had people pull me back. A pause. Figure maybe it's time I returned the favor. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged against the boarded windows. Ghost's breathing slowed as sleep claimed him, his head now resting fully on Naomi's knee. She watched Lucas across the firelight. The questions she wanted to ask pressed against her teeth, demanding release. Who are you really? What broke you? Why did you follow your dog down a mountain in the middle of a storm to find a stranger? But those questions could wait. Tonight, survival was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own demands. Lucas? He looked up. Thank you for not asking questions, for not looking at me like I'm crazy, or lying, or both. I've seen too much to doubt what people are capable of, good and bad. He stretched his injured leg toward the fire's warmth, grimacing slightly. Get some rest. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next. Naomi leaned her head against the wall. Her body ached with accumulated exhaustion, but her mind kept spinning, unable to fully accept this unexpected sanctuary. The fire was warm. The dog was solid and real against her leg. And for the first time in 7 months, she wasn't alone. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it tonight. She closed her eyes. The storm howled outside, but inside the walls held. The fire burned, and Ghost kept watch with ancient wisdom in his silver muzzle. Naomi Keller didn't dream of running. For a few precious hours, she didn't dream at all. The smell of coffee pulled Naomi from the deepest sleep she had known in 7 months. Not the bitter instant powder she had been surviving on, but something richer. Real grounds brewed over an open flame, the aroma filling the small ranger station like a forgotten comfort. She opened her eyes to morning light, filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but warmth still lingered in the air. Ghost lay exactly where he had been when she fell asleep, his head heavy on her thigh, his dark eyes watching her with calm awareness. Lucas crouched by the fireplace, a battered metal pot in his hand. He moved with the economy of someone who had performed this ritual in 100 temporary shelters across a dozen countries. "Storm's still holding," he said without turning around. "Won't break until tonight, maybe tomorrow." Naomi sat up slowly, her muscles protesting the hard floor, despite the exhaustion that had claimed her. Ghost lifted his head to accommodate her movement, then settled back down as if her leg had become his permanent pillow. "How long was I out?" "6 hours, maybe 7. He poured coffee into 2 metal cups. "Longer than you've slept in a while, I'm guessing." She didn't bother denying it. Her body felt different this morning. Still tired, still carrying the weight of 7 months compressed into her bones. But something had shifted during the night. Some tension she hadn't realized she was holding had loosened its grip. Lucas crossed the room and handed her a cup. The metal was warm against her frozen fingers, and she wrapped both hands around it like a lifeline. "Thank you." He nodded and returned to his position by the fire, settling into a crouch that kept his weight balanced and his legs ready to move. Even at rest, he maintained the posture of someone prepared for threats that might never come, but probably would. "I need to get to my cabin," he said. "Better supplies there, better security. This place is fine for a night, but if your friends come looking, it won't hold." "They're not my friends." Figure of speech. He took a long drink of coffee. "Point is, we need to move. Question is whether you're coming with me or heading somewhere else." Naomi stared into her cup. Steam rose from the dark liquid, curling and vanishing like the plans she had made and abandoned over the past 7 months. "Where else would I go? They found me everywhere. Portland, Boise, Montana. Every time I thought I was safe, every time I started to believe I might actually disappear, the phone would ring at 3 in the morning. The tracker's gone now. That changes things. Does it?" She shook her head. "They have resources I can't match. Money, technology, people who get paid to find people like me. Losing the tracker slows them down. It doesn't stop them." Ghost shifted, pressing closer against her leg. The weight was grounding, solid, a reminder that she was still here, still breathing, still fighting, even when fighting felt pointless. 3 days, Lucas said. She looked up. "Storm won't break for at least 1 day. After that, another day or 2 before the road's clear enough for anyone to reach this area." He finished his coffee and set the cup aside. "That gives us 3 days to figure out your next move." "Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. His gray eyes drifted to Ghost, who had begun to doze again with his muzzle resting on Naomi's knee. 10 years ago, I came to these mountains to disappear. Thought if I got far enough from people, I could stop feeling responsible for the ones I couldn't save." He paused. "It didn't work. Distance doesn't fix what's broken inside. But it gave me time to figure out how to carry it. And you think I need time? I think you've been running so long, you've forgotten there might be another option." The words landed harder than she expected. She had told herself the running was strategic, necessary, the only logical response to an enemy with unlimited resources. But sitting here, wrapped in an army blanket with a stranger's dog pressed against her side, she felt the truth beneath the justification. She was exhausted, not just physically, though her body had been pushed past every limit. Something deeper had worn thin. The part of her that believed survival was worth the cost. 3 days, she said finally. And then I figure out what comes next. That's all I'm offering. The walk to Lucas's cabin took 2 hours through knee-deep snow and wind that cut through every layer of clothing. Ghost ranged ahead of them, his dark form appearing and disappearing in the white curtain of the storm, always returning to check their progress before surging forward again. Lucas moved with steady determination despite his limp. The cold was clearly aggravating old injuries, but he never complained, never slowed beyond what the terrain demanded. Naomi found herself matching his pace, drawing on reserves she hadn't known she still possessed. The cabin emerged from the storm like something solid becoming real. Small but sturdy, built from logs that had weathered decades of mountain winters. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant Lucas had some kind of automated system running, and the windows were intact, covered from inside with heavy curtains. Inside, the space was spare but functional. A main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, a door leading to what she assumed was a bedroom. No photographs on the walls, no decorations. Just the necessities of survival arranged with military precision. One object caught her attention. A small wooden box on a shelf near the fireplace, positioned with obvious care despite the general austerity of the space. Lucas noticed her looking, but offered no explanation. "Bathroom's through there," he said. "Should be hot water if the generator's behaving. I'll start breakfast." The shower was hot. She stood under the spray until her skin turned red, watching 7 months of accumulated grime and fear swirl down the drain. When she emerged, clean clothes were waiting outside the door. Men's clothes, too large for her, but warm and dry. In the main room, Lucas had produced a simple breakfast. Eggs scrambled in a cast-iron pan, toast made on a wire rack over the fire, coffee that smelled even better than it had at the ranger station. The scent made her stomach clench with sudden, violent hunger. Ghost had positioned himself between her chair and the door. His watchful eyes moved between the window and his human, maintaining vigilance, even in the safety of home. "He really guards everyone like this?" Naomi asked between bites. "He's never guarded anyone except me." She looked down at the dog. Ghost met her gaze with steady calm, and something in her chest loosened another fraction. They ate in comfortable silence. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, and for a few moments, the weight of the past 7 months felt almost bearable. Then Ghost's ears rotated. His head lifted from his paws, attention fixed on something beyond the walls. Lucas noticed immediately. He set down his fork, his entire demeanor shifting from relaxed to alert in the space of a heartbeat. "What is it, old man?" Ghost rose and crossed to the window, his nose pressed against the gap between the curtain and the frame. A low sound rumbled in his chest. Lucas moved to join him, lifting the curtain just enough to peer outside without being visible. He stood there for a long moment, scanning the white chaos of the storm. "What do you see?" Naomi's voice came out steady, despite the fear climbing her throat. "Drone. Small quadcopter, running a search pattern about half a mile out." He let the curtain fall. "They're not wasting time." The fear she had managed to forget during the night came flooding back, filling her chest with ice. Of course they had found her. They always found her. The tracking device had been convenient, but the corporation had other methods, other resources, other ways of hunting prey that dared to run. "I need to go." She was already moving, looking for her jacket. "I'll lead them away from here. You don't need to be part of this. Sit down." The command in his voice stopped her mid-stride, not harsh, but absolute. The voice of someone who had led men into combat and expected to be obeyed. "That drone is running a grid search, moving systematically, which means they're not sure exactly where you are. The storm's giving them trouble. Visibility's compromised. Thermal imaging is scattered by the wind and temperature variations." He moved away from the window. "If you run now, you light up on their sensors like a signal fire." So what do I do? Wait here until they narrow the search?" "You let me think." He crossed to a cabinet and pulled out equipment she recognized from her years working crisis management. A radio, military grade, a satellite phone, newer model, a laptop that looked heavily modified. You have communications? Emergency setup. Kept the gear when I left the Navy. Old habits. He examined the satellite phone with practiced hands. Who exactly is hunting you, Naomi? Not just a corporation. I need specifics. She hesitated. The habit of secrecy ran deep, carved into her by months of trusting no one. But Lucas had burned the tracking device, had offered shelter without questions, had followed his dog down a mountain in the middle of a storm to find a stranger. Meridian Energy Solutions. The words felt like releasing a breath she had been holding for 7 months. Government contracts for Arctic development, pipeline projects, drilling rights, infrastructure consulting. They have connections in Washington that go all the way to the top. What did you do for them? Crisis management, which is a polite way of saying I made problems disappear. She forced herself to meet his eyes. And then I found a problem that was never supposed to be found. Ghost returned to her side, pressing against her leg. The weight was grounding, real, a reminder that she was still here, still talking, still fighting. 3 years ago, Meridian started a research station in the Beaufort Sea. Officially, it was environmental monitoring. Unofficially, they were testing extraction technology that hadn't been approved by any regulatory body. What happened? What happens when you cut corners in one of the harshest environments on Earth? Her voice hardened. Equipment failures. Safety protocols ignored because they slowed down the timeline. 12 workers died in a single incident. Officially ruled an accident caused by extreme weather conditions. And you helped cover it up. I documented what they told me to document. I wrote the language that made industrial negligence sound like an act of nature. The self-disgust in her voice was audible. I was good at my job. Too good. They promoted me, gave me access to more projects, more sensitive information. And then you found something worse. The real research. The technology they were developing wasn't just dangerous, it was weapons grade. Energy extraction methods that could be weaponized, that were being weaponized, with full knowledge of certain government officials. She met his eyes. When I reported it internally, they gave me a choice. Take responsibility for the original cover-up, sign a confession, become their scapegoat. In exchange, my family stays safe. You refused. I refused. And they showed me what happens to people who refuse. Her hand moved to the scar on her neck. The gesture was automatic now, a nervous habit she couldn't break. The car accident was supposed to kill me. When it didn't, my family received visits. My brother was arrested on fraud charges that appeared out of nowhere. My parents were told their retirement funds might be at risk. Her voice cracked slightly. My mother sent one message while I was still in the hospital. 2 sentences. We can't be involved. You have to understand. They chose fear. They chose survival. I can't blame them for that. She laughed bitterly. But I can't forgive them either. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled between them, and Ghost's breathing provided steady rhythm beneath the howl of wind outside. You still have evidence, he said finally. Not a question. What makes you say that? Because you're still alive. If they had the documents, if they were certain you couldn't hurt them, you'd have died in that car accident, or in Portland, or anywhere else. He leaned forward. You have leverage, something they want back. That's why they're playing with you, instead of ending it. Naomi reached for her red jacket, still damp from the journey. Her fingers found the hem, pressed against a small, hard shape sewn into the lining. USB drive, everything. Research data, internal communications, payment records linking Meridian to offshore accounts controlled by 3 senators and a deputy secretary of defense. She pulled the tiny device free. Enough to bring down the company, enough to end careers, enough to change everything. Lucas took the drive carefully, turning it over in his fingers. You've had this the entire time you were running. 7 months. And you never tried to use it. Use it how? I'm a disgraced former employee with conspiracy accusations, waiting the moment I surface. No journalist will touch a story this big without corroboration. And everyone who could corroborate is either paid off or terrified. She shook her head. I have the weapon, but no way to fire it. The drone sound had faded, moving to continue its search pattern elsewhere. The immediate threat had passed, but they both knew it would return. Lucas pocketed the USB drive. The gesture was deliberate, taking ownership of her burden without asking permission. I still have contacts, he said. People I served with who ended up in places where information moves differently. Lawyers who specialize in cases that aren't supposed to be won. Journalists who built careers on stories that powerful people wanted buried. You would do that? Put yourself in their crosshairs? I've been in crosshairs before. He glanced at Ghost, then back at her. Didn't care much when I was the only one at risk. But that dog led me to you for a reason. The second day passed in tense preparation. Lucas made calls on the satellite phone, speaking in clipped sentences to people whose names Naomi never heard. She caught fragments. Evidence package. Witness protection protocols. Media contacts outside usual channels. Ghost stayed close to her throughout. Late in the afternoon, the old dog brought something from the corner of the room and dropped it at her feet. A worn tennis ball, faded and chewed from years of use. Lucas froze mid-sentence on the phone, his eyes fixed on the ball, then lifted to Ghost. I'll call you back. He stood motionless, staring at his dog. What is it? Naomi asked. That ball. His voice was rough. Ghost hasn't touched it since Afghanistan. Since before the mission. It belonged to one of my men, Torres. He used to throw it for Ghost between operations. Naomi looked down at the faded toy. Ghost watched her with patient expectation, his tail moving slightly. He wants me to throw it, Lucas's voice cracked. He hasn't wanted to play since Torres died. She picked up the ball. It was lighter than she expected, worn soft by years of being carried and mourned. Ghost's entire body quivered with anticipation. She threw it across the room, not far, just enough to make the old dog move. Ghost bounded after it with joy she hadn't seen in him before. For a moment, he wasn't an aging military dog with silver on his muzzle. He was young again, playing the way he had before loss taught him to be careful with hope. When he brought the ball back, he dropped it at Naomi's feet and looked up with something that felt like gratitude. Lucas turned away, but not before she saw him wipe his eyes. That night, Naomi found Lucas sitting by the fire with the wooden box open on his lap. 6 metal tags gleamed in the firelight. Dog tags. Each one engraved with a name, a service number, a life reduced to stamped metal. Tell me about them, she said softly. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began. Martinez was the youngest, 23. Had a daughter back home he'd never met. His thumb traced one of the tags. Chen was our medic, best I ever served with. Another tag. Kowalski, Harrison, Reeves, Torres. You carry ghosts, Naomi whispered. Lucas looked up. In the firelight, His gray eyes shimmered. So do you. The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. I've been carrying them alone for 10 years, Lucas continued. Thought that was what I deserved. Penance for being the one who walked out. He closed the box slowly. Maybe carrying alone just makes the weight heavier. Naomi reached out and placed her hand over his. The first willing contact she had initiated in 7 months. Maybe we both were wrong. The third day brought the storm's end and the beginning of everything else. Lucas received confirmation from his contacts. A journalist willing to run the story, a lawyer preparing protective filings, former colleagues ready to verify Meridian's weapons research. But the corporation wasn't waiting for legal proceedings. Ghost's warning came just after noon. A sharp bark, followed by frantic movement toward the back door. They've found us, Lucas said calmly. 3 vehicles approaching from the East Road. 15 minutes out. How do we don't run. Running is what they expect. He was already moving, gathering equipment. We end this. Today. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. They would lead their pursuers into the forest, using terrain Lucas knew better than anyone. They would reach the old fire tower 3 miles west, where satellite uplink was strongest. And they would broadcast everything. The trek through the snow was brutal. Lucas's leg gave out twice. Each time, Naomi pulled him up, shouldered his weight, kept them moving. Leave me, he gasped the second time. You can move faster alone. I'm done running alone. The words came out fierce, certain. For 7 months, she had survived by trusting no one. And now, faced with the choice between escape and loyalty, she chose to stay. Lucas stared at her, then nodded and let her help him stand. They reached the fire tower as the sun began to set. Behind them, flashlight beams cut through the growing darkness, minutes away at most. Lucas set up the satellite uplink with hands that shook from cold. Naomi watched the tree line, Ghost pressed against her side. Ready, Lucas said. The moment I hit send, this goes everywhere. News outlets, congressional oversight committees, international agencies. They can't stop all of it. Naomi took the USB drive from his hand. Her fingers trembled, but her voice was steady. I want to do it. He nodded and stepped back. She plugged the drive into the laptop. For a moment, she stared at the screen, seeing not data but faces. The 12 workers who died in the Arctic. The family who abandoned her. The woman she had been before all of this. That woman was gone now. She hit send. It's done. The flashlights emerged from the trees. 4 men, armed. At their center, one figure stood taller than the rest, silver hair catching the last light of sunset. Victor Ashworth. Miss Keller, his voice carried across the snow. You've led us on quite a chase, but I think we both know how this ends. Actually, Naomi stepped forward, I don't think you do. Whatever you've sent, we can contain. Check your phone, Victor. She watched his confident expression fracture as alerts flooded his screen, calls from board members, messages from legal counsel, breaking news notifications. You can't contain all of them, Naomi continued. You can't silence every journalist, every watchdog reading those documents right now. It's over. Victor's face contorted with rage. For one terrible moment, Naomi thought he would order his men forward anyway. Then helicopters filled the air, 3 of them approaching fast. Not corporate assets, something official. Victor Ashworth looked at the sky, looked at Naomi, looked at everything crumbling around him. Then he turned and walked back into the trees, his men following. Running now. Hunted instead of hunter. Lucas's hand found her shoulder. Ghost pressed against her other side. "It's over," Lucas said quietly. "Is it?" "This part is. The rest is just beginning." 2 months later, Naomi stood in the doorway of a small house in a Colorado mountain town. The red jacket hung on a hook inside, not worn anymore, but kept. The investigation had consumed everything: congressional hearings, federal indictments. She had testified 3 times. Her family had reached out, her mother's voice on the phone trembling. "We were scared, Naomi. You have to understand. I understand. I understand you made the choice you thought you had to make. Can you forgive us? I'm working on it, but I get to choose who stays in my life now. That choice is mine." She hadn't closed the door on them completely, but she hadn't opened it either. Ghost found her first, bounding around the corner with more energy than an 8-year-old dog should possess. His tail wagged furiously as he pressed against her legs. "Hey, old man! Where's your human?" Lucas appeared a moment later, walking up the gravel path with a duffel bag over his shoulder. No limp today. He stopped at the gate, waiting. "You came," Naomi said. "I said I would." He smiled. The expression still surprised her every time. "I'm not here to protect you," he said. "Those days are over. You don't need a guardian anymore." "Then why are you here?" Lucas set down his bag. Ghost had already pushed through the gate, already making himself at home. "I'm here to build something, if you want." Naomi looked at him. At Ghost, now sniffing the flower bed she had planted. At the house becoming a home. "I want," she said. She opened the gate and let Lucas through. Sometimes the people who save us aren't looking to save anyone. Sometimes they're just trying to survive their own ghosts. And sometimes that's exactly what makes them the right ones to stay. The red jacket hung on its hook inside. No longer a signal of distress. Just proof that endings can become beginnings when you stop running long enough to let them. Some families are born, others are found. Both can be home.